She's 2 blocks away from me. She takes not even down, but she takes care of my dog. So she's it's great.
Oh, that's nice.
Literally don't have to cross that way. I just don't love the house. It's around.
Some idea.
She made a clean last night, so I'll mix up periodically. Her garbage is way better than mine, so I can
Okay, we are all here. Do we want to take up the 2 other requests? So the question 1 is, do we want to adjourn? And if not now, is there a time?
I really appreciate the idea of moving up the item 4F and then adjourning. Or is that,
I just need a motion to move it up.
I'll second that.
I'll move to amend the agenda to move item 4F up to, I don't know, where are we? 3C. I haven't talked about loading things yet.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I should have put a condition on it that as long as the item can be addressed within a reasonable time frame. But we can always adjourn.
You can always make a motion to adjourn at any time.
That's true.
Okay. Motion carries 7-0. And so now we will take up consideration of creating a refuse collection utility. Mark.
Thank you. This is new for staff, but feedback was that as part of the annual budgeting process, staff was asked to present to the village board for their consideration some opportunities to diversify the village's revenue streams so that they're not dependent on property taxes, or not as dependent on property taxes to support municipal operations. So we came up with 6 options that we felt were significant in magnitude and would serve to diversify the village's revenue streams that were not as dependent on property taxes to support municipal operations. This particular item, refuse collection utility, a number of communities do refuse collection, solid waste, different ways to frame it, but basically they create a utility that handles the costs of providing a series of services, and then they charge outside property taxes a user fee per household for those services, or whatever metric is approved by the community. So the caveat to this is that creation of a refuse collection utility would remove these costs from property tax bills and allow the utility to charge customers a set rate based on those policies to those customers who receive these services. It will also require a reduction in the village levy limit. This is not an exempted transfer of services.
Like fire when they go to user fee, is that correct? So if you go to a user fee, like fire user fees, or
That public fire protection is a different situation than a refuse utility, correct? Staff doesn't see this as being an issue because we're reducing costs that we're levying for. It seems reasonable to reduce the levy limit for the village. It's a pretty neutral impact. And then the utility would act to be a self-sustaining enterprise. And again, the recommended motion is to prepare appropriate resolutions for the board to consider for the 2019 budget. If there's interest in moving to that direction and staff is so directed, We would do that with a few options for the board to consider. And then if those are something the board wants to engage in, we'll modify the 2018 or 2019 budget accordingly. So that's a quick synopsis. There's a fiscal note there that depending on the magnitude of services, this could be a $500,000 item if you went both refuse and recycling, a little more if you want to start talking about other solid waste pickups with yard waste, potentially a brush.
Are you saying revenue increase? I know we talked on the phone, but when you just quoted those numbers, according to our phone conversation, this is not increasing revenues, which is weird because I thought we were going to talk about ways to increase our revenues.
This diversifies our revenue stream.
So that's different. I just wanted all the board members to understand. This has nothing to do with getting more dollars into the village, which it's just moving them. So
That's correct.
I don't know why, okay. So I
And
don't want to say
again,
about
this is the task that staff is responding to in these recommendations, is to diversify the revenue stream away from property taxes. So this is one potential item that could be considered to achieve that goal. Staff would recommend, obviously, if you create a refuse collection utility, that the utility would absorb the remaining costs of the bonds that were issued to purchase the recently acquired collection equipment, and whatever other costs the resolutions would call for this utility to manage, and then we would develop the appropriate fee structure for the board's approval, and they would have.
Trustee Maher.
So if this was removed from the property taxes, commercial properties would not be contributing to the cost of refuge. So actually would shift more costs
20% more.
onto the residential properties. It would also be a regressive property because the lower costs, the more costly houses would be paying less than before. So you'd be a regressive charge in the income. So.
Because you're saying because the assessed value is
Assessed
what
value,
property
you pay
taxes
more
are.
if you have a larger house. Say a house on Lake Drive would pay $50, say just a number, $265 a year for a thing. The person over here could be paying $265 too. Or now they may be totally different under the property tax.
And the commercial point you made is that almost 80%, 20% of our collection of taxes is commercial.
Right.
If we go to utility, they don't pay, but you have the same service dollar amount and you're splitting it under less people. So, Tristan,
I think, in general, I don't agree with shifting money to utilities just off the tax levy because it's still, it reduces the tax levy number, but it's still hitting the taxpayer to, carry the burden of, we all have to pay for services. So just in general, that's a philosophy that I have that I'm going to go into this with, but I'm really open to seeing what the benefits might be. And the only thing long-term that I could see as a benefit is that if we try to move towards a pay-as-you-go for, refuse to encourage people to reduce the amount, two houses may pay a different amount right now, but they're not, producing a different amount of waste. So for that, it sets up a way to incentivize people down the road, but that's not really what we're prepared to do at this time. So I'm not sure we're 100% there yet with how this could benefit the community.
Thank you. Okay, Mark.
I just wanted to add one brief note. Again, this model does reflect that the people who receive services would pay for them. Current municipal policy does not provide refuse collection services to 4-family or larger properties or commercial properties. And as we previously discussed, the size of a property does not necessarily reflect the amount of refuse collected when it comes to trying to go with property values. So definitely a change. Certainly one way to frame this is regressive. but it's actually, from a fiscal perspective, it's fee for service, and that's why it was brought forth for your consideration.
Exactly, I appreciate the creativity.
Trustee Bachhorst and then Menta.
I appreciate the creativity and the thought of this because there are other municipalities across the nation that have adopted a similar thing. However, it's based on tonnage or size of your container. For example, in Seattle, you had the option, you were charged for your garbage, which it is regressive to charge, as you were mentioning. However, it was by the cubic volume. So if you had a 5 gallon, let's just say, I don't know, you were charged a certain amount per month. And there was, of course, administrative costs, I'm sure, to like determining which household had what. Or if that week you wanted to put out a larger container, you were appropriately increasing the amount that you were. So from an environmental point of view, if there were a way to change this to create a habit, what is it called? Behavior fix. Yes, thank you. I'm very tired of George tomorrow, but then
Moving the needle.
I could see how this would have a very big benefit as far as sustainability is concerned. But so anyway, I'm curious, just like Trustee McKay said, to see what kind of impact you were suggesting for as far as other benefits that we would have for us.
Trustee Menta.
And I think I'd like to ask the Conservation Committee members to speak, because I know this has been one of the priorities, and that we will, I think this is a first step in order to get to a situation where we can charge people based on the different rates. And right now, in the property tax, it's like we pay an average. So somebody who, creates very little garbage is being charged under the property tax at the average for the whole village. And we know there are some people who don't bother to recycle at all, just throw all their recycling in their garbage. We're never going to really be able to affect this issue unless we can start to create, and this is the first step to being able to create those incentives, but I would really like them to have an opportunity to speak more about it.
Sure, and just so the public understands that after every trustee has an opportunity to speak, then we can call on the public. That's just the way
But they are our conservation committee, so
Yes.
they're here representing the
Trustee
conservation.
Menta, after the trustees are all done with their questions, I will call on the Conservation Committee to address the council. I had a couple of questions. Does anyone else need to speak at this moment? Okay. My concern is that, similar to Trustee Maher's, my understanding of this exercise was to increase our revenues, or at least in the next time we meet, or in the 15th, we're going to talk about decreasing some ways to decrease expenditures. So we have a gap in the budget. I'm all for switching to a utility for environmental reasons, as suggested by, I think, most of the board members that spoke tonight. But if we're in the frame of mind of revenues, just to be clear, right now the commercial is subsidizing residential, and I think that's a huge benefit because, without 20% of our tax base paying in for garbage collection, the household costs are going to go up. I'd like to know how much, number one. And number two, 20% I know, but what is that? And then the next part is that this may actually increase our expenditures because in programs similar to what Trustee Bachhorst has mentioned, I know Trustee Menta had posted a few online, recycling is free and they charge by container. And right now we're picking up garbage cans that are half full. And so I'm just saying it actually may have the impact of reducing our revenue. I'd like to know how much before I vote to change it. But again, from an environmental standpoint, I'm supportive of going to a utility. I just need the numbers in front of me in order to make that decision, just like we did for the garbage collection. So I don't know what I'm requesting except that we dedicate time to look at those numbers before I would be supportive of it tonight. So with those comments, does anyone else on the board that hasn't spoken want to speak or ask questions? Okay, if not, welcome. Please state your name and your address.
Lynn Frank, 4321 North Prospect Avenue. member of the Conservation Committee, and also present, we have Chairperson Josh Liberatore, and Donna Pollock is also a member of the Conservation Committee.
Welcome.
This strategy is one that has been of interest to the Conservation Committee for some time, and we were a little surprised that it came up, for tonight's discussion. But I'd like to make a few comments, and some of them will be echoing what the trustees have been mentioning, and that is that switching to a utility will create visibility for those charges, which are now, enveloped within the property tax bill and not seen directly by the consumer. It creates the flexibility, so as Trustee Amenta said, this would be a first step towards having a flexibility. Having this under the property tax bill, there is no flexibility to offer different charges for different levels of service, for different tonnages of waste that are being collected from different households. Once we have a utility, there is that flexibility available.